Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Unpredictable. It is great to have you join us for another episode. Nowadays, everything we do is the last thing of 2023. And I believe you will add this episode to your I'm glad I did list because my guest and I will be talking about the poetic inspiration of the vital side of our lives. Yes, on this episode, I am having Candace de Taeye, and we are going to talk about her recent poetry book, Pronounced Workable, which includes very impressive poems in it. And of course, at the end of the conversation, we are going to listen to the unpredictable thing she had and the way how she dealt with it. Hello, Candace. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Under.
It's a great pleasure to me. I hope the last days of this year treat you well.
Looking forward to it.
I believe it does because you are closing this year with a great success. Dear listeners, once you have a look at the best Canadian poetry collections list of CBC, you are going to see there Pronounced Workable. So, congrats on it, Candace.
Well, thank you so much. I'm as surprised as you are that it was on there.
Candace, you are a writer and a paramedic at the same time. And the poems in this book are the reflection of your 12-hour shifts in healthcare. I mean, in your daily routine, sirens, traffic, all the hustle and bustle of the city of Toronto. Can we go back to the very beginning now? Which one of those poems is the first one that you wrote? And what made you to write those lines at that moment?
Ooh, that's a good question. The oldest poem in this collection, I mean, really might be like sort of the miscarriage poems. They might actually predate anything else. So it might be Unbarren Newly, which was actually like the first poem that was ever published on page like 48, and that's more miscarriage, although it does use like the medical terms in it. I think that's the oldest one. As far as the oldest paramedic poem that is in this book, there was a series that was written probably 6 or 7 years ago through a home-based workshop that Hua Wen, the Griffin Award-winning poet, used to run out of her house. So the 10-8, 10-7, 10-9 poems are part of like a longer series, and they're, I guess, the next oldest and work-related poems in that collection, and they're 6 or 7 years old.
Okay, perfect. So, the poetic inspiration from your work, let's talk about it more. As a paramedic, you are not doing a desk job. I mean, you are always on the way to different places to help different people who have different lives and different issues and different stories. So, how and when do you feel, yes, I need to write something about this?
I think, I mean, any writer is told to write what they know, and this is kind of the world that I know, and it's very different than what most writers come from. Like a lot of people teach or into pedagogy or have other day jobs, but there's not a lot of paramedic poets. There is a subgenre of doctor poets, but they're coming from like a different place of authority. So there's always been doctor poets, but I don't know too many other like respiratory therapists or paramedic poets or firefighter poets. I'm sure there are some out there. But yeah, I feel it was just a different life experience, and it's I aimed for this collection to be like a poetry of witness, of seeing all these little snips of other people's lives. Sometimes, a lot of times the worst or most stressful day of their life, sometimes joyous, mostly terrible. And just the geography and the little known places and secret places across the city. I wanted to share that with folks who may never get to see it, even if they've lived in Toronto their whole life.
Candice, your lines tell some hard stories naturally, and I would like to read these lines from the poem Destination. And then I would like to ask my question. Let me find it. It's Page of 32nd. Yes, here it is. Here a 13-year-old boy didn't want to forgotten. Now, 3 meter tall letters spell out his name. Let me read one more line, please. This is from the poem Death Naive, and it's on the page of 54th. The grad student's suicide note on the screen, not paper. Writing these lines right after having those hard experiences, hard scenes, is this kind of a soul healing? I mean, is this like instead of keeping those harsh feelings inside, you are writing what you see?
I mean, I don't know if it's like totally catharsis because I think a lot of these poems come much later. The way I usually write poetry is I keep, notebooks of these little quotes or of these snippets or of, lines, even like lines of graffiti that are on buildings that I'm driving by in Toronto or signs in hospitals. Um, so it's generally not immediate. Like I don't think I wrote like the back third of the book is about COVID, and I didn't even start writing any poems about COVID until 8 months or close to a year after the pandemic started. So it's not an immediate reaction, but I definitely let it simmer, and it is like I guess a way to process those experiences. But yeah, it's usually not like a knee jerk reaction. It usually is more of a slow cooker.
Okay. Let's talk about that COVID times. I believe you had many hard and funny experiences with the people you helped, especially during the COVID-19. And there's a funny dialogue in the poem Omicron Grand Finale. I really like that about the mask. My question is that, I mean, of course, pandemic days at work were different than the other times. Did it affect your writing as well? I mean, in a negative way, in a positive way? What happened in those days?
I think I think there was so many writers and poets who all of a sudden were stuck at home and their teaching or day jobs were put on hold and everybody was stuck at home. So I think a lot of people wrote a lot of content, especially in those early lockdown days of COVID. But I was going to work, and it was
Yes.
a very different work experience, and it was like a whole new world. And I was like taking notes, but it was sort of work was all encompassing, even though at the beginning it wasn't that busy because similar to SARS, people were initially scared to go to the hospital. Or later on, people were reluctant to go to the hospital for something that they would have never thought twice about, like for a heart attack or a stroke or a urinary tract infection. People would have never questioned going to the hospital, but now knowing that their family couldn't be there with them, people were choosing to just stay at home and take their chances. So that was a lot to cognitively deal with, and trying to keep my job, but also respect people's wishes and morals and give them the information that I could. So yeah, I didn't do a lot of writing for the first bit of COVID.
It makes sense. Yeah, I remember those days, especially at the very beginning of those days. I mean, we went back to work from home. Those days were horrible. Now I will ask a question about a unique and a beautiful poem from your book. All the lines has a story of another life because they come from different languages and different cultures. I mean, everything is in poem is different, but there's a mutual feeling. Everyone is needy here, and you were there to help. The name of the poem is the Google Translate app History. It's a unique and interesting and really beautiful poem. So, how did you decide to write this poem? How do you describe these lines?
Like Toronto's an amazing place, and it's full of like so many diasporas and people from all over the world, and people, you know, retaining their languages and their culture. So, but sometimes there's a language barrier, and usually you have enough time to figure it out, or there's somebody you can call, or there's somebody there, you know, a neighbor or an adult child, or somebody can translate for you, but not always. Um, so the all of the lines in this Google Translate app poem are actually from Google Translate on my phone. They were sitting in there. And they're arranged in sort of the same line of questioning that I would go through with every patient. Obviously, some of these people have different complaints, whether it's, you know, a diabetic problem or a heart problem. And I don't know, and I'm not sure that my publisher knows like how correct those lines in,
Mhm.
you know, Japanese or Korean, Arabic, like Farsi,
Yeah,
like
I see many
how correct
languages
those
in
are.
it.
Like there could be inherent errors in them, and I think like that
Hmm.
is important to like point out that, like, you know, perhaps native speakers who are, you know, going through this book are like, oh, that's terrible. She thought she said that. Like that's like the grammar in that is terrible, but that's, I mean, the tool that I had to work with
Yeah,
at the.
I believe they're gonna like it. So you see many different cultures in those houses or maybe workplaces. Can you tell us about how this diversity affect your writing?
I mean, I love traveling. I love eating. I go to work to eat. So I mean, I want to eat everybody's everybody's food. I want to go to all
Mhm.
the restaurants. I was driving down the Danforth and I saw there was a new Georgian restaurant, like Georgia the country and not the state. And I was like, oh, that's on my list of places to try. Um, but I think, you know, it makes you curious about other people's, because I think if you're, you know, a paramedic who is interested in helping people, you do want to learn about what's important to other people, and you know, other sort of cultural norms. So, you know, going into a mosque during Ramadan, or going into people's homes, or, you know, a lot of cultures have very specific practices around a death, or a dead body, and usually we would put somebody back in bed before we leave if it's, you know, kind of an expected death. But sometimes you should leave them on the floor, and you
Oh,
should respect that there'll be a family member staying in that room.
oh, okay.
So I think just trying to learn a little bit about, you know, the cultures in the city, and the little things you can do that means so much to people.
Okay. Uh, Being a paramedic, you have a poetic note at the end of the book. Let's talk about it. I mean, I would like to read a small part of it, if you don't mind. Yes, here it is. Paramedics are nearly feral and the least popular of the three emergency services in both media visibility and toy production, though we have the darkest sense of humor. Okay. Can you please tell us more about this darkest sense of humor? What is the source of it? How you use it? How it works?
I mean, I think, you know, whether people develop a dark sense of humor after being on the job for a certain number of years, or it's those people who come to the job in the first place. I think it's a coping mechanism, because some of the things that we see pretty regularly are really like unfathomable to most people, other than maybe once or twice in their whole life. But it's a different experience because you don't know the people. That doesn't lessen the value, but, you know, it's not personally, you know, your family member generally. So I think you have to, and not every paramedic, but most of us have like a really dark sense of humor that we generally just share between each other. And we also like trade stories, and not in a, you know, be able to identify anybody way, but we do sort of keep a roster, like trading cards of like the most ridiculous things that we've ever seen. And when we're all together in a hospital doing our paperwork and it's a group of like 6 or 8 paramedics, inevitably like some sort of story time will start and we'll be trading these stories. And there's no names, there's no addresses, but there's like this kind of like, oh, you know, I did this ridiculous thing. Oh, but I did a similar thing and it was equally ridiculous. And we had to get him out this way. So, I mean, it's kind of a trauma bonding, but also maybe problem solving in case you ever run into that same scenario.
Okay. So why do you think you are not popular?
The like paramedics in general, like the
Yes.
I think like, you know, little kids, they want like fire trucks and
Uh-huh.
police cars, and like you, if in the toy section, like count how many times there's actually an ambulance
Oh,
version of a toy.
yes.
Like there's almost
Yes.
never.
Yes,
and
correct.
and then also like practically, like everybody loves those big red trucks, and like practically from like a municipal budget standpoint, like, you know, fire budget is like 20 times
Oh,
the EMS budget, and fire is like 10 times. So it's just like, you know, um, without getting too political, the people who are worried about human life
uh-huh.
in a medical sense are not as well represented as people protecting buildings and businesses, perhaps.
Okay. No, no, I see. So next time at the mall, I'm gonna check the all the shelves. I mean, toy shelves. Let's see
Mm-hmm.
if I'm gonna see one ambulance. I don't know because I don't think I've ever seen an ambulance as a toy. I don't remember.
Yeah, I have
Okay.
2 boys, and I tried to find them some ambulances, right? Like you really got to search it out.
Okay. Let's go back to your writing. Writers always have their own environment to be productive. I mean, like a quiet room at home or a corner of a library. Do you feel more productive when you are in the ambulance? Because as far as I know, you are writing your poems mostly in your ambulance while your ears on the radio. So would you prefer to have a fancy quiet place or your spot is that ambulance?
So I like to read in the ambulance, and I definitely take a lot of notes in the ambulance. And I don't usually like write poems in the vehicle, but sometimes if I have some downtime at a station, I'll try and do some writing there. About halfway through COVID, I did break down, and like very Virginia Woolf space of one's own, I made like one of those little studio sheds in my backyard and like put a big steel deadbolt door on it and like quiet insulation. So I do have a little room of my own now. But yeah, still some initial ideas, and the fodder, like the piecework of the poems happens in the ambulance. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, Candace, do you want to make these stories a bit longer than poems? Maybe a short story or a novel?
I don't know. I don't. There is another paramedic in Toronto who's
Uh-huh.
hilarious, Morgan Phillips, and he has done sort of like a stand-up play show at like the Fringe Festival, which is like the short story version, and it's
Mhm.
funny. So I definitely suggest people find him, because he has a big sort of Wheel of Fortune wheel, and he spins, and whatever the arrow lands on, those are the stories he'll tell. So it's a different show every time. So
Mhm.
I feel there is somebody doing that. But no, I think I'm done writing about work for a little bit. Yeah.
Oh, okay. What's the next then? What are you working on now? I mean, if it's
Nothing
not a
so
secret.
I took a good break, but
Oh, okay.
yeah, no, I have an idea for next collection of poems,
Hmm.
and maybe I would like to branch out into prose at some time, maybe like dark fairy tales or something,
Hmm.
as cliche as that sounds, but yeah, there'll be another collection of poetry, and it'll have nothing to do with ambulances.
Okay, sounds good. So, Candice, this is the last question. What is your unpredictable thing in your life that you would never forget about it? And how did you deal with it?
All right. So the unpredictable thing that happened in my life would be, I guess, being a paramedic in Toronto and COVID-19 happening at exactly the same moment that I applied to do the University of Guelph Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. So I had been accepted into the program within a couple of weeks of COVID-19 starting. So the application had been sent in before COVID-19 was on anybody's radar. And I don't know that I would have applied to do that program. I don't know that I would have undertaken a graduate program knowing that a worldwide pandemic was about to start, with me working shift work in health care and having a 2.5 and a 5-year-old child at home. I probably wouldn't have. So I think like that was really hard, but also made it easier because a lot of those courses were now available online, which would have never happened before. So it made it easier in some ways for me to balance the home and work and school life because I could do these, 2-hour workshops on Zoom. And I mean, I have to, acknowledge my husband that he was home and shouldered a little bit more of the domestic burden while I undertook this graduate degree. Because I was, just locked away in this shed in the backyard, inaccessible for long periods of time during that 2 years. So I think he needs, Stephen de Taeye should get a shout out on that one. But I think, as unpredictable and as hard and as stressful and unknowable as that situation was, it made this collection very, very timely. And I don't know how many other people would have seriously looked at or read a collection about being a paramedic if we weren't just on the tail end of this pandemic and it didn't come out so close after, sort of the main epidemic before it sort of moved into this ongoing endemic problem. So I think it was a blessing and a curse, right? Like it made it really hard and really stressful, but I think it ended up being like a very timely collection because of it that has garnered more notice than it would have, because it was nominated for the Relit Award, it was nominated for the Gerald Lampert Award, and now it made the CBC year-end list, which is like way beyond my expectations, frankly.
Okay, Candace, thank you very much for this beautiful conversation. Thank you for your generous answers. And also, I would like to thank you for what you have done as a paramedic and then as a writer. I mean, thank you for writing this lovely book.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Under. Thanks for reaching out. And it was so great to talk to you. Thank you.
Dear listeners, now it's time to say goodbye. Thank you for listening to us. Please don't forget to like and share this episode, and please hit the subscribe button and stay tuned for the next episode.